Well, we can go ahead and get started if people roll in, whatever. So anyway, well, my name's Emily Mayazga, and I'm a nutritionist. I used to be a dietitian by profession, and I'm also the creator of M's Power Cookies. And I became addicted to the Spites Coast to Coast after my first experience. I came in 2004 and did the first event where the mountains were flooding, and literally 3/4 of the field never even made it to the finish. They were just flooded off the course. However, myself and 2 other women were the only 3 women who actually finished that year in the women's event. So I think right after that race, the exact words that came out of my mouth were, there's no reason to ever do that again. But 7 times later, I've done the race 7 times. I've won it 3 times. In 2006 was my first year when I won it, and I did a crazy cartwheel at the finish. And 2008 was the year that I nipped victory in Red Cliffs 2 Ks before the finish line, and it was the most exciting and the closest race in the history of the Spites Coast to Coast, men or women. And then in 2009, I had some really formidable competitors that year. And on the final 70K time trial, I literally rode away from my competitors, which was such a good feeling because I had some strong women I had to beat. And I reckon it must have just been those power cookies. So the reason I actually started the business was because of the Coast to Coast, because I needed some good nutrition that I could rely on that would help me to get through my sports nutrition, but it also needed to taste good, because one of the most important things with food and nutrition, you know, there's all this stuff out there, and half of it doesn't even taste good. So how are you supposed to eat it and get on with what you want to do if it doesn't taste good? So that's how I started M's Power Cookies. And although I don't practice as a dietitian full-time anymore, obviously, I still do some speaking and I do some sports nutrition consulting. And so that's why I'm here today, is to help you with some nutrition information and education. So first of all, I want to talk about energy metabolism. And it's really, really important to keep your bodies fueled. Your bodies are meant to move, they're meant to exercise, and if you're not putting the right fuel in the tank, it's just simply not going to function properly. Now, there's a lot of confusing and misinformation that's out there in the media, and I hope that I can clear some of that up for you today. One thing with the supplement and the diet industry and the diet books, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So you really have to look at what somebody's saying to you. What are they trying to sell? Who's done the research? You know, who's the financial backer? And sort of evaluate that. Because, like, for me, even as a dietitian, it's sometimes difficult to understand what comes out in the media, what's true and what's not. Like, oh, one day eggs are good for you, the next day they're not. And it's just like, how do I know what to trust and what to do? So I'm going to be talking about carbohydrate and energy metabolism today, because that's all part of fueling yourself for your activities. Now, first of all, in order to get into that, we have to talk about the nutrition basics. So getting to the nuts and bolts of nutrition, it really boils back down to the good old food guide pyramid. And the food pyramid does change and it does revolve, depending on who's paying. But the basic premise of the food pyramid stays the same. And so if you look at all the different groups in the food pyramid, they're all carbohydrates. So what are carbohydrates? Does anyone actually know what is a carbohydrate? A carbohydrate is like, no. It's sort of like, you hear about it all the time, and it's like, well, what exactly is it? Well, it's actually a macronutrient. It makes up, it's one of 3 macronutrients from where we get our energy from, or our calories. So we eat food, and from your food you get fat, you get protein, and you get carbohydrates. And fat contains calories, protein contains calories, and carbohydrate contains calories. But going back to that food pyramid, the food groups that make up those carbohydrates, it's fruits, vegetables, whole grains, so all of your cereals, breads, pastas, couscous, rice, corn, all of those foods, our basic dietary staple comes from carbohydrates. And then, of course, there's refined sugars as well. The main functions of carbohydrates are to provide our bodies with energy. And actually, with the food pyramid, the majority of the food groups come from carbohydrate, because most of our calories need to come from that. That's where we get our energy from. So that's the first and foremost function of carbohydrate. The second function is from eating wholesome healthy, unprocessed carbohydrates, you're also getting micronutrients, which are vitamins, minerals, dietary fiber. You must have dietary fiber, not in a supplement, but from actual food, and that's really important for bowel health, decreasing your risk of bowel cancer, all that sort of thing. And of course, your healthy carbohydrate foods also provide you with antioxidants and phytochemicals. So antioxidants are really important for cellular health and maintenance, and phytochemicals, those are kind of like magical things that are in foods that for whatever reason they're really not quite sure how phytochemicals work, but they actually help to prevent cancer. You know, there's tomatoes that have lycopene, and broccoli, and certain fruits like blueberries that are very, very high in these phytochemicals that really do help stop cancer. Now, is there one food that's magically going to stop you from getting cancer or whatever? No. Of course, it comes down to eating a variety of foods and eating them in a healthy source, so you're not eating like processed, refined types of foods. So having a variety of foods and eating wholesome types of foods in order to get those benefits, because it's really difficult to bottle Mother Nature, contrary to what supplement companies will tell you. So now, coming back to fueling your tempos, there's a lot of information out there, particularly the protein diets and the fad diets that say carbohydrates are bad for you. But in fact, carbohydrates are really good, and they're a necessary part of life, because what happens is when you eat food in the form of carbohydrate, 100% of that carbohydrate turns into blood sugar. So let's say I'll draw an apple. Does that look like an apple? A little bit. So you eat the apple, and 100% of the carbohydrate that's in that apple, and by the way, all of the carbohydrate that's in that apple is in fact sugar. It's natural sugar. It's good for you. It's necessary. So 100% of that goes into your bloodstream, and it forms what's called blood sugars. So it's really important to eat something, carbohydrate, at least every 4 hours or so you're maintaining your blood sugar levels, okay? So the apple turns into blood sugar. You get a rise in your blood sugar, which is a normal response. Now, in diabetes, this happens as well, but it goes abnormal. It goes too high. And diabetes is a disease of carbohydrate metabolism. I'm not going to talk about that in a lot of detail today, but basically in diabetes, this system is broken. So in a normal functioning metabolism, you get the rise in blood sugar, and as that happens, it sends a signal to your brain, which then sends a signal to your pancreas to release some insulin. And you've all heard of insulin. Insulin's a hormone, and the hormone gets secreted, and it literally, so put the pancreas over here, it secretes the little bits of insulin, and the insulin takes the sugar, and it literally opens, that's a doorway into a cell. So the insulin escorts the sugar from the bloodstream, and it gets into the cell. So once that happens, then your blood sugar levels drop back down and return to the lower level of your normal range. And so over the course of the day, you eat food, your blood sugar rises, it goes into your cells, it drops. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And that happens on about a 4-hour cycle. So what happens when that blood sugar is in your cell? Your cell metabolizes that blood sugar, well, it's now just glucose, inside your cell, and it's actually used for fuel, it's used for energy, and then you can exercise, you can do whatever it is that you need to do. Or what happens if you don't burn that sugar? It turns into fat. That's right. So you gain weight. Now, we all get busy, and we all know that sometimes it's not possible to eat every 4 hours, or you skip a meal, you think, oh, I'm not going to eat carbohydrates after 6 o'clock because I heard that's bad. Well, what that actually does is it puts your body into the first stage of starvation. And so that's when your blood sugar levels drop, and they stay low, stay low, stay low, and then your body goes, oi, when are you going to feed me again? And if you don't feed it, if you don't give it some more carbohydrate, then it goes, I'll show you, and it'll actually start to hang on to calories. It'll start to hang on to that energy that's in your cell, and you gain weight. Your metabolism slows down, and you're not burning fuel efficiently. So ironically, the secret to losing weight, the secret to fueling your body for sport and exercise, whether it's walking around the block or climbing Mount Everest or doing coast to coast, it's all about fueling your body and keep maintaining those blood sugar levels about every 4 hours throughout the day. Okay, so that's really, really important. If you go longer than 4 hours, you are literally entering stage 1 of starvation. There's 4 stages. You get to stage 4, you're dead. So we don't want to die. No, you're not going to die, but you are going to upset your metabolism. And so it's very, very important to get that. So does that all make sense? Okay. Now, have you all heard of glycemic index? Or do you know what glycemic index is? GI. Glycemic index is a description that we use to describe carbohydrate foods as to how quickly or slowly they turn to blood sugar. So apples, being a natural sugar, they take a long time to turn into blood sugar or into glucose. So there's a lot of, it can be really, really confusing out there because, people will say, well, carbohydrates are bad and sugars are bad and you shouldn't eat sugars. Well, there's a healthy balance between the types of carbohydrates that you have to eat. So with the low glycemic index types of carbohydrates, yes, that is where the majority of your foods in your diet should be coming from, because the low GI foods tend to be the healthiest foods. So that's your whole grains, your unprocessed cereals. If you're going to eat bread, eat really grainy, heavy bread, like the Bergen type breads and stuff like that. Virtually all fruits, all vegetables, they're all low glycemic index. So it's a combination of your unprocessed starches as well as your natural sugars, so your fruit sugars, honey, those types of sort of more refined sugars, they're all low GI. So when you look at the nutrition label on certain foods, and you look at the total carbohydrates, let's say it's 50 grams of carbohydrates, and let's say 50 of it comes from sugar. You go, oh, I'm not going to eat that because it's bad for me. Well, if it's dried fruit, all of that 50 grams of carb is going to be coming from sugars. Or on my power cookies, there is a breakdown of total carbs and sugars as well. Well, that sugar it's coming from a mixture. There's fruit sugars, there's honey, there's rice syrup, there's also some brown sugar. So a little bit of sugar is actually okay. And when eaten in combination with foods that are wholesome and good for you, it's actually really good. And sometimes it's a necessary thing to have a little bit of sugar in your diet because you want things to taste good. And, sometimes it's really hard to get all of your energy requirements from just eating like beans and vegetables and stuff, because if you just did that all the time, you might not have too many friends if you're farting too much. Actually, when I'm training for Coast to Coast, it's virtually impossible for me to get in all of my energy requirements from beans and vegetables and whole grains because it takes too long to digest them. There's a lot of dietary fiber and it would just be too much on my system. So I actually need to sort of supplement my diet with added sugars. So when I'm training, I use sports drinks. I'll drink Coca-Cola on big training rides. That's what I use in Coast to Coast. It's part of my secret weapon in my nutrition plan is Coke. Gels, on my breakfast in the morning when I have like whole grain oats and I put a bit of brown sugar on it, but I also have some nuts and, a bit of milk and I make it actually taste really good, and the sugar is just one part of that. So sugar is actually okay, but you do want to avoid eating heaps and heaps of refined sugars. You want the majority of your calories to be coming from those wholesome sort of unprocessed types of carbohydrates.